Hey everyone, this is Kate, and you're listening to Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. Nikki can't join us today, so you're just going to have to deal with my voice and my voice alone. For that reason, we might not go the full hour, but we did want to continue on with the podcast and not let too long of a time go in between episodes. So for right now, it'll just be me, and we'll be talking about being your own healthcare advocate today. We thought it was best, especially since I was absent for a while due to my spinal surgery, to really have a discussion about the power of doctors, the importance of planning ahead, and the importance of speaking up for yourself and doing your own research. So to kick off today's episode, as we do with all episodes, we're going to play our intro music by the wonderful Big Sean, and then we'll get started. All right, so once again, you're listening to Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate. Today it's just me, Kate Utassi, and we're going to be talking about being your own healthcare advocate. So, I know that the status of healthcare in America is kind of up in arms, and there's a bit of turmoil going on about healthcare, the healthcare system, about the Affordable Care Act and what's going to happen to it in the future as compared to what's happening in other countries with their healthcare systems. I, for one, have needed good healthcare my entire life, and thankfully I've been the beneficiary of having private healthcare that has been able to keep my family out of medical debt. But I know others aren't as lucky, especially when there's any kind of ban with pre-existing conditions. So Nikki and I thought best to talk today with you listeners about how to really stick up for yourself. You're the only one that lives in your body, as far as we know of. There's been no alien abduction. And so you know exactly what you're feeling. So even though doctors go through a whole bunch of schooling, there's pre-med with undergrad, there's med school, they do their residencies, sometimes fellowships, and then, go out into the world and practice. Even with all that education, they're still basically mainly dealing with textbooks until they get to their residency. And they're told, this is the science behind it. This is what happens to the majority of people with X, Y, and Z conditions. And they go about their business accordingly. But sometimes each person's body responds differently. I know for one, I'm a diabetic. I've been a diabetic for 30 years. And I now interact with insulin differently than I did when I was younger. So I need more insulin nowadays because my body has become more insulin resistant. So even though you might look at a chart and say, okay, well, she ate 30 grams of carbohydrates and her blood sugar is 120, and so therefore she should give herself X number of units of insulin. Well, I, for one, might need something different. It also goes through a different resistance throughout the day. So I might be more insulin resistant at night than I am during the morning. So that's why with my insulin pump, my diabetic specialist and I have spent years trying to perfect the daily rate of insulin that I receive, and even down to the hour, what I'm receiving in terms of insulin. So it's not sometimes as easy and as simple as an equation. that they might learn in a textbook. They have to really be able to interact with their patient and find out what works for them. And sure, those of us who go to doctors aren't doctors ourselves. We haven't been through their amount of education. But once again, we know our bodies and we know how we respond to things. We know the effects that certain drugs will have upon us, and whether they work or not, whether I need a higher dose, whether, I need a different prescription for a different drug to treat the same condition. It's very, very important to be able to express yourself respectfully, but clearly and forcefully to your healthcare specialist so that you can work with them to figure out how to best treat your medical conditions. So, I understand how empowering it might feel to be a doctor, especially a surgeon. You literally have your patient's life in your hands, and you've gone through all this schooling, and sometimes, I would like to think that most of the doctors out there are pretty brilliant. So if you have all that combination, it might, I'm not saying that every doctor is like this, but for some, they almost develop a God type complex where they feel like they don't need to listen to the patient as much because the patient might not be as educated or might not understand how a certain disease works. And that's where our health system gets into a bit of trouble, because it can be pretty intimidating, especially for people who haven't been through the system a lot. I counted for a recent hearing that I counted the number of doctor's visits and procedures and testings that I've had done in the last few years. And I had 56 different appointments and testings and procedures done just in one calendar year alone. So that's more than once a week. I know that there are people out there that very rarely go to the doctors. Some people have never even had an operation. Some people don't see their doctors more than once or twice a year. And if you're doing that and you're healthy, congratulations, and I am completely jealous. And I hope that continues for the rest of your life. But when you're in that situation where you're not very familiar with how to interact with doctors, and then an emergency comes up, you may be taken off guard. And then you're going to have to make a huge decision really, really quickly. And the doctor is going to be giving you a lot of information very fast. And there might not be too much time to explain or ask a bunch of questions, and you're going to have to be able to rely on them. So it's incredible the amount of power that doctors have, and it's understandable how much training they go through before they're given that power, because it is so unbelievable that we have the ability as human beings to try and get cancer into remission, try and fix broken spines, try and, keep people from passing away earlier on in life. I went to a rheumatologist once who said, had I been a diabetic born 20, 25 years earlier than I was born, I would be dead by that age. I would be dead by that time that I was seeing the rheumatologist. Which is probably true, and it speaks to the progression of medicine and the progression of our healthcare system. But still, it's a kind of morbid thing to think about, that those of us who do have long-term incurable diseases or disorders, we're so fortunate to have the healthcare that we have now. But those who came before us really had to suffer a lot and passed away a lot sooner than hopefully those of us now do, because of the healthcare system. So it's wonderful to see the progression and the advances that doctors and even pharmaceutical companies make, because we are given the chance to live a better quality of life, I'd like to think. So one thing that Nikki and I thought was important to talk about in this episode was the power of decision making when it comes down to an emergency, and therefore the importance of planning ahead, especially when you have kids. So even though this discussion might seem a bit morbid, even though you might not want to have this really uncomfortable conversation with a spouse or someone who's going to be the person who takes care of your children if you have an untimely death, the conversation really does need to happen. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, I'm only 20-something or I'm only 30-something, it's going to be a long time before I pass away. And I hope that's true. I hope for each one of you that is absolutely true. And I hope that you never need to enact an emergency system of estate planning. But the reality of the situation is there will be those of us who have accidents. There will be those of us who unfortunately develop a terminal illness sometime in the future. And you don't want to be put in that situation where if that occurs to you, you're not ready for it, and your children aren't ready for it. And then it has to go, your estate has to go into probate court, or your kids are put with someone who you maybe wouldn't be your first choice of who would take care of your kids if you were to pass. So it's really, really important to have advanced care directives going on and in place so that if something like that does come up, you can be rest assured that what you would want to have happen is going to happen. So for me, I don't have any biological children of my own. I'm blessed with a stepson, but I'm not raising him. I'm not taking care of him. So I don't have anyone that I would need to worry about being taken care of at this moment in my life if I were to have an untimely death. But even so, my belongings, I would want them to go to particular people. I think Nikki and I talked about it in an earlier episode, maybe very briefly. But if I were to pass, I wouldn't want a religious service. I can understand that part of the grieving process for someone passing is that it's sometimes more about the family and their ability to grieve than it is for the person who has passed. But for me, being an atheist, even though I was born and raised Roman Catholic and I was an altar server and in the church choir and was very, very religious up until my high school years, I would find it very hypocritical if I were to pass and I then had a spiritual religious service on my behalf. I'm not saying that I have the correct view. I could be 100% wrong in my religious beliefs. But I don't believe that my spirit will still be here after my body passes. So for me, there's really no point in having a burial and having a funeral mass and having a wake. So for me, it's really important to know that when I pass, that people are thinking about the happy times. Hopefully, everyone that I've interacted with that I consider myself a friend or a family member has a positive experience that they've had with me within their lifespan and could feel some joy about thinking about that after I pass. So what I would like to have happen and what I've put into my advanced care directives is that if and when I do pass, I would like just kind of a big party, kind of the way the Irish do. And, people can go up during the service or party and say a fun or funny or loving or caring story that you might have or memory of me. And you can all just, raise a glass to hopefully the good I've brought into the world during my life. And hopefully by the time I pass, there will be a lot more to think about and to be able to recall. But that's what I would want. I don't want prayers. I don't want anything. I want my body to be cremated after it's used by Brown Medical School to better educate future doctors. For me, I think that's something that's really important, that they have the opportunity to check out a body that was kind of riddled with illnesses and diseases and disorders for my entire lifespan, pretty much. So I think that will hopefully further educate doctors, the next generation of doctors. So that's why this fall I went to a very entrusted friend who happens to be an estate planning attorney, and I got my affairs in order. I got a living will as well as a regular will. I got a healthcare power of attorney, and I got advanced care directives done so that if I were in an accident and say I were to become comatose, that my husband would know when to pull the plug and why I would want him to pull the plug, as well as the hospital would know whether to invoke any life-sustaining measures, and if so, to what extent. So you may not want that. You may want to have all the life-sustaining measures in the world for as long as possible and hope to be one of those miracle patients who go into a coma and 20 years later wake up. Or you might want the exact opposite and have no life-sustaining measures in place. But unless you have that legally drawn up, then the doctors have no way to enforce that. And that's why, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, Terry Schiavo, maybe? I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but the woman in Florida, and then the battle that her husband and her parents had to decide whether and when to pull the plug, that was pretty informative to, I think, a lot of people in the country who might not have thought about that scenario happening. Your husband or your wife or your partner may have one idea in place, and your relatives might have a completely opposite idea in place. And so that's why it's really important if you have someone, especially if you're not going with the person who legally would have that decision-making authority. If you're married and you don't want your spouse making that decision, that's incredibly important to have it in legal writing. And if you have a partner who doesn't have the legal rights to do anything, again, very, very important to have that drawn up. Until a few years ago, it was a scenario where not every same-sex couple was able to have that without the advanced care directives in place. It wasn't magically, hey, we've been together for 40 years, so that takes precedent over a family member that you've been estranged to for that period of time. It has more to do with legally who is entitled to make that decision for you. So not to get on a soapbox and preach about going to a lawyer, I know for Rhode Island, I believe that on the state's website or one of their websites, they do have kind of standard forms, and you might need to get those notarized. I'm not entirely sure. I never practiced that area of law, which is why I went to a friend to have mine done up. But just check it out. I think that's one thing that'll make you kind of not have to worry about in the future. We worry about a lot of stuff in our lifetime, especially if we have people that we look after. If we're a caretaker or have children, you want to make sure that they're taken care of, even in your absence. So again, really, really important. I know it's not a fun conversation. My husband and I did not have an enjoyable conversation this fall when discussing what to do with the remains of my body and what to do. In lieu of flowers, I would like donations made to certain medical charities. Those are things that aren't fun to think about, because who wants to think about their loved one dead, especially in an untimely way? Nobody. But I think it's something that, at least for someone like me who's been thinking about it for so long, it's something that's really, really important to put your mind at ease. So even if you don't have a lot of assets to divvy up in terms of a will, you might want to at least figure out what you would like done medically. And I know there are that's why if you go to an attorney who deals with these things, they'll be able to tell you what's kind of standard. There are certain options. You might not even think about certain things like, should they still give you a feeding tube? Should they do X, Y, and Z? It's things that we as, average people don't really think about in detail. But that's why, legal professionals will help handle the medical professionals. And throughout being a patient, especially in the last few years and becoming disabled, it's really made me think about the importance of speaking up and doing your research and how much power that our doctors have over us. And I thought about it lately in terms of, well, geez, I mean, can I draw a parallel between medical professionals and their power and legal professionals and the power that even I had over, making decisions for my clients and making sure that they're informed and that they understand all of their rights. The legal system can happen very fast, just like the medical profession can happen. Things in a hospital happen very, very fast. And at times, you don't have a ton of time to chat about your options with your legal client either. So we as lawyers, I know we have ethical and even legal responsibilities as to informing them and making sure that they have a good understanding about what's going on and trying to help them make the best decision for them, but let them ultimately decide certain things. There are things in the legal community where we're not allowed to make decisions for our clients. When I was practicing criminal law, was not allowed to decide whether I wanted a bench trial, meaning a trial just in front of a judge, or a jury trial. That was my client's right to decide. It was my client's right to decide whether to appeal a conviction, to have another set of judges take a look at what happened during the trial phase and to see whether any legal or factual errors were made. So there are certain things that they have to decide, but they're huge, huge decisions. It's a huge decision whether to plead guilty or to take it to trial, and to agree to a plea deal. And criminal lawyers had to continue to have to let their clients know if and when a prosecutor makes an offer for a plea deal, so that the client can decide, no, I don't want that, or can we ask for something different? But a lot of the clients either had mental health conditions or substance abuse issues or, very little education. So if you are dealing with someone who might not necessarily grasp a concept as well as you have after years of law school and then being in practice and learning and being immersed in the legal world, how much time should you really be spending with each client to make sure that they fully understand the impact and the consequences of each legal decision they make? So I drew a huge parallel between the legal profession and the medical profession, because I've been treated by the full gambit of doctors. I've had amazing, amazing doctors who were kind and compassionate and took all the time in the world to make sure I understood what I was going through and what my decisions would likely lead to. But I've also had doctors who were incredibly condescending or really horrible at interacting with their patients. They might be incredibly smart and very, very skilled at what they do medically, but they did not teach compassion in medical school, as far as I could tell, because some of these doctors are around and practicing and are very dismissive, don't want to hear if you have questions. If you have questions, they get annoyed, and they'll tell you what to do, and you're scared. I mean, in the medical and legal world, there are a lot of situations where the person coming to you as either a doctor or a lawyer is at sometimes their lowest point. They could be, dying. They could be in so much pain that they really just would almost do just about anything or agree to anything to get that pain reduced just a little bit. Or in the legal world, their whole life, their literal life could be at stake. They could be charged with a capital offense, meaning that they might receive the death penalty, or they might be incarcerated for their entire life without the possibility of parole, without the possibility of being able to be released back into the community. Their family might have just left them because of news of the arrest. Their spouse might be leaving them. They might be kicked out of their home, unable to see their children. So there are a lot of things that might be at stake, and these people are coming to those of us who have professional degrees, and they're saying, please, I'm at my lowest point. I need your help. I'm trusting you because you have the title. You have the title that comes with someone who's been through the training, who's been through the schooling, who's had to take, for doctors, their boards, or for lawyers, your bar exam. Those are huge, incredibly difficult tests that not just some average Joe Schmo off the street could come in and immediately pass. So there are all these hoops that doctors and lawyers have to jump through in order to get that title that we as patients or clients rely on and say, hey, they have that title. They're in good standing. They've been able to practice. They've been doing this for X number of years. They're regarded highly by their colleagues. They were recommended by my general practitioner. They were referred to me by a trusted friend. These are good enough things, good enough reasons why I want to go and seek their help, and why I'm going to have almost blind faith in them. I've been in rooms with enough doctors now where within 5 to 10 minutes, just by their attitude and the way they're speaking to me and whether they're explaining things, I can get a pretty good read as to whether they have people skills or not, and whether I'm going to feel comfortable with them or not. And again, there are some doctors where, hey, I know that we'll never be best friends. I know that this person might have a very awkward personality, or maybe no personality at all, or maybe even a very frustrating personality, but they're so good at what they do that I really don't care. We're not going to go for drinks after you cut open my eye and put in a cataract lens. So go forth. Go with God, as they say, and do my medical procedure. As long as you're good at it and I'm going to come out okay and being able to see, go ahead and cut open into my eyeball. But there are certain doctors where it makes it very difficult to trust in them if they're not explaining things, or they're being so dismissive or being so annoyed. I wish that more people could understand the importance and the ability of each and every medical patient to be able to voice their concerns, to be able to ask questions. Some patients are elderly. Some patients have diminished capacity. Some patients are taught to respect those of authority, or those who are older than them, say, if they're not elderly. And so we might just blindly say, okay, I trust you. I don't know a thing that you just said. That all sounds very complicated, but as long as there's a good chance you can fix my heart and keep me from suffering another stroke or heart attack, do it. Just do it. Cut me open. And to a certain extent, again, it's not a personality contest. So fine, do it. But you need to know, and I know there's out there, there's, the Patient's Bill of Rights, and there are organizations that help empower people to ask questions. But I think in general, we don't really become educated as patients as to what we're able to do. And sometimes I think deferring to authority, deferring to those with titles, can have negative consequences. I, for one, went through the experience, and I was misdiagnosed for over 2 years, and I saw specialist after specialist, and I kept telling them, my symptoms are getting worse. Why is this happening? And they would be dismissive. I even saw a doctor from a very, very well-regarded medical facility, and he was referred to me by my original pediatric neurosurgeon. So I went to this specialist thinking, gosh, he's got to be the best. So whatever he has to say, he has to have the authority and the knowledge and the experience and the credentials to have power behind what he says. And I went to him last summer, and he was incredibly condescending and incredibly dismissive. And did some more testing and said, no, you're fine. This is what you have. You don't need to have more tests. You just have to deal with it. You have to deal with your symptoms. And at that point, I was still bedridden, and I really was in so much daily pain, and sometimes I couldn't get out of bed. Sometimes I was so fatigued, I was sleeping for most of the day, and that's not who I am. I'm an incredibly hardworking person, and it really tore me apart emotionally and mentally to change my quality of life so dramatically over the last few years. So I continued, following the doctor's regimen, but also knowing inside, like, hey, I know I'm experiencing these symptoms. I know they're getting worse. I have a good sense of what my body is feeling on a given day. And so I got a new general practitioner, a primary care physician, who is amazing and spends so much time with his patients that you instantly feel comfortable with him. I mean, he just makes clear to you that he truly does care about your well-being and how you're feeling and wants to help you feel better. And so he ended up referring me for more testing when my symptoms were getting worse, and I was experiencing muscle weakness in my legs. And so I went for yet again, like the 5th or 6th MRI that I had over the last couple of years. And that radiologist happened to say, hey, her spinal cord, might be tethered again. And tethering just means that it's being pulled on. It's being, if you think of the spinal cord like the string of a window blind, if you pull on it, it gets tension against it. So that's all that they were talking about. The cord is being pulled upon. And obviously that's not good and can lead to some severe consequences. That's what happened to me when I was 4, because a tumor that I was born with had been pulling on it, had wrapped around it and was pulling on it. And I had surgery for that when I was 4. Part of the tumor that was in there originally ended up needing to be left in there. But the doctors monitored me each year until I was like 12 or 13. And I went on to play sports, and I competed internationally for track and field. I was, lifting 400 pounds and leg pressing 700 pounds. And so if there was ever going to be a time where my cord would be pulled upon again or be in danger, you would think it would have been those 8 years between 1998 and 2005. So it didn't happen. It happened 10 years after that in December of 2015. And my spine was pulled upon again. But for over 2 years, numerous doctors, after numerous tests, thought it was something completely different. It was a nerve disorder. And so to have this one radiologist who was referred to, or who was reading an MRI done by ordered by my primary care physician, just happens to suggest this without knowing that I had a tethered cord 30 years prior. And so I was referred to a neurosurgeon at Rhode Island Hospital. And she happens to be a specialist in tethered cord. So it was really, after coming from, a very well-regarded, well-known facility and being dismissed, I asked that rude doctor from last summer, hey, do you think my cord could be tethered again? And he said, no, that is not your issue. And shooed me away and told me to go see a neurologist. And that wouldn't have helped at all. And had I listened to him, I could have been paralyzed because my cord could have been pulled upon and could have snapped. And so I have my primary care physician, who is not a specialist in spinal disorders. I have him to thank because he sent me for the testing, and he saw that I was getting worse, and he believed what I was telling him and how much pain I was in. And it happened to be true. And that's what's so important, is to have people with advanced degrees and advanced knowledge and advanced training to believe their clients. I know sometimes it's difficult. I know there are always going to be people who try and cheat the system, or, in the medical field, are drug seeking. I, for one, said no to opioids because they made me vomit. So I was going through all of this without any kind of hard narcotic. But there are people who are going to be drug seeking. There are going to be people who are who have Munchausen's, who make up things just to get a doctor's attention. There are going to be people who over-exaggerate because, they're dramatic or whatever the reason. And it's the same thing in the legal field. Criminal law is very, very difficult. It's very difficult to have people who have lied to others and themselves so much that they start to believe their own lies. And so you ask them what's going on, and they lie straight to your face, even though you know from the clear and convincing evidence that it might say something different. It's hard to talk to somebody and give them advice when they might not have ever accepted responsibility for their actions in the past, ever. And so how do you get them to accept that they committed a major felony? And that's not every client. I had some amazing clients. I had some people who were in dire situations, and I've represented innocent people. I know I have. I've represented guilty people. I know I have. And I've represented a lot of people where it wasn't for me to decide whether they were guilty or innocent. That wasn't my job. But I've had people who were very respectful, and we had an excellent rapport and relationship. And I think the reason why I was successful in my career was because I did listen. I did take the time. And I know I had the luxury of time. You go into public defender systems, and they are just absolutely unable to give you the time that you might need. They have hundreds of clients that they're seeing at any given time, and they just literally do not have time. They don't have the time to spend with each and every person. They couldn't even go without sleep and handle every case in the way that you might want to be handled. And that is not a reflection of those lawyers. It's a reflection of the system and the lack of funding. And it's the same kind of parallel in the medical profession, because you'll get excellent doctors, but they are scheduled within the minute, and they have, 10 people scheduled in an hour's time, and they have to get through like 80 people in a day. And it's just impossible to listen to every concern or question, or to really dig deeper to find out what's going on in the person's life, to maybe make those connections that others will miss. And that, again, might not be a commentary on the individual doctor at all. It might just be the fact that they're so good and they're getting so many clients being brought in that those in charge of them, those making money off of them, decide that, hey, why not book more patients? Because more patients equals more dollars for us. So it's kind of a reflection of the system instead of a reflection of the individual. But that being said, I think it's time for both systems to undergo drastic changes and to empower people, the individual person, to say, you know what, I demand better. I demand more. And in situations where the doctor is condescending or dismissive, to say, no, I'm going to be heard. I'm going to be listened to. You're going to hear me out. You're going to treat me with respect. And I'm not going to accept anything short of that. But that's tough. That's tough for an individual to do. It's tough for anyone to speak up to someone in power or authority. If you might be thinking, geez, if I piss this doctor off, is he going to fire me as a patient? Is he going to not give me as good of medical attention as he does someone who just sits there and says yes, no, whatever you say? And in some situations, that might be a valid question to ask because it might be true. But in my experience, at least, and this is going off of someone who was raised by a nurse and raised by someone to stand up for myself and to make clear as to what I'm feeling and to be sure that I'm receiving the best medical care possible, I tend to lean on the side of speaking up for myself. It's hard for me to do in social situations, but I've become much better at it, medically speaking, and being a patient. Because especially with something that's as difficult to kind of visibly see or to actually quantify is a pain disorder. And there are a lot of people out there with incurable pain disorders. And they ask you from 0 to 10, with 10 being the worst pain and 0 being no pain, how are you feeling? How much pain are you in today? I've been asked that question countless times, and I think of my answer every single day. I think, well, gee, how much pain am I experiencing today? Is it better after I've put my feet up? Is it better after, I get more sleep? Is it better in the spring or the summer? You think of things that will maybe have an impact on your pain level. But when it comes to speaking with a doctor and you're saying, oh, well, I have, for speaking for myself, diabetic neuropathy in my arms, legs, feet, and hands. And diabetic neuropathy is a nerve problem where your sensory nerves are being impacted. And so you feel sometimes pins and needles, you feel some numbness or tingling, you feel some sharp shooting pains. And I've been woken up by it for probably the last 10, 15 years I've experienced it. So, and I just recently had it diagnosed in my legs a few years ago. but it's difficult to quantify. It's difficult. Like, how is my 7 compared to another patient's 7? Some people will throw out the number 10 as being their pain level, like candy. I mean, every day it's a 10. Is that my 10 or is that my 5? So it's hard to assess, and I'm sure it's very, very hard for the doctor to assess. Well, okay, how much pain is this person's 7? What should I do to try and alleviate their pain? And I've been given numerous medications. Some did nothing. So I've had to call back the doctor and say, hey, can we try something different? Don't be shy to do that. If you're having bad side effect on one, like I was having with higher scheduled narcotics, I would throw up within 5, 10, 15 minutes. And so you have to be able to speak up and say, hey, I'm not sure. I know that you said that this is the most effective drug for most people, but I seem to be experiencing a really bad side effect that's just not making it worth taking the drug. Is there anything else that you can recommend? Have those discussions with your doctor. And if it takes them a while to get back, maybe try calling again. I understand that doctors are just as busy, maybe even busier sometimes than lawyers. And I know how busy I was. But I would always make the time to return my clients' calls, to return even their family members' calls. I would do it within the day, maybe sometimes even immediately if I had the time, if I wasn't, in court or at prisons, or I'd call after I was done for my workday. And not every doctor is able to do that, and I'm not saying that I had the best balance of life because I put my clients' lives and their issues far ahead of mine, and that had some dire medical consequences for me. So I'm not suggesting that each lawyer and doctor ignore their own personal well-being just so they can reach every person and give every person as best care and as best representation as possible. Sometimes it's just impossible, and that's a sign of systematic failure, not the personal failure of that individual person. But stand up for yourself. I know it's hard to do sometimes. I know you might feel like you're being a pain in the butt. But you have to be able to speak your truth. You have to be able to have a relationship with your doctor where you know that you're being told everything that needs to be told. I've had doctors who didn't tell me about side effects, and then I would get my medical records and see that they had written down that they had informed me. And coming from the legal profession, I learned about informed consent in law school. I might not have practiced medical malpractice law or even personal injury law, so I didn't see a ton of medical stuff in my legal profession outside of the sex offender stuff. But I knew about informed consent. I knew about the legal standard, at least, that the medical personnel had to adequately explain to their patients the consequences. It's the same thing for the legal field. But not every non-doctor or non-lawyer is going to know about that. So you might just assume, hey, my doctor would tell me. My doctor would tell me if there was this huge potential risk. My doctor would tell me if there's this really bad side effect. I've been prescribed drugs and gone to the pharmacy and had the pharmacist say, hey, have you ever taken this drug? Make sure you're not driving when you take it, and see how it affects you before you start to drive. I was not told that by my doctor out in Texas. I specifically asked him, what are the potential side effects? And he said, it could make your brain a little, He just kind of like made this hand gesture and suggested your brain might be a little fuzzy. That's the only thing he said. He didn't say be careful driving. He didn't say, I saw later on a commercial for the same exact drug that it might lead to suicidal ideation. It might lead to depression. It might lead to X, Y, and Z. And I absolutely know that he did not tell me that. And then I later saw on the records that he had written down that he did. And it was to cover his ass. And again, I've had amazing doctors. I know some incredible doctors, but I also know some pretty bad ones. And it's the same thing in the legal field. I know some amazing attorneys. I know some attorneys who are amazing and are in a really hard system with poor funding and are therefore unable to display their best in every single case. They just make do with what they can, and they give the best performance under those circumstances. Do I think they would give even better performances elsewhere? Absolutely. But it's just not possible. It's a systematic failure. So it's not a comment on individual doctors. It's not a comment on doctors as a whole. I love and respect medical professionals. I love and respect lawyers who do their jobs and take their jobs seriously and take their power over other people's lives seriously and provide the care that people in this country need as patients and as clients. But we, unfortunately, in our current state of system, can't just rely on that. You can't. It's sad for me to say, and I hate to be bumming everyone out by this episode, but it's just the reality. And it's a reality that I wish I could make clearer to people, because I've been through a lot, and I've been through, I think I counted 49 surgeries in my lifetime, surgeries and procedures. And so I know I'm not the average person. Like, the average person doesn't go through just about 50 medical surgeries and procedures by the time they're 34. It's just not normal. I know that. But my experience also makes me better able to come out of it and tell people to be wary of this, or to tell people, you should try and do that. I wish better health and better treatment by the healthcare professionals on everyone. I wish everyone was healthier. I wish everyone lived a longer, better quality of life than those that came before us. And that's my hope and my wish. But in order to do that, we all have to be informed. The same way that certain communities have to be informed about how to interact with police. Again, it's not a commentary on individual police officers necessarily, as it is on a systematic failure, but it's just a reality. I'm not saying it's fair at all, but persons of color have to be more vigilant and more informed and more woke than non-minorities, than white people. It's just a reality. It just is. I experienced that living on the border. I would go to security checkpoints with Border Patrol, and they wouldn't even ask me if I was a citizen of the U.S., which is a standard question when you're going through that checkpoint. And the person behind me would be a colleague in their car, and they would be Mexican American or Puerto Rican, and they would be questioned very vigilantly and asked, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? What are you up to? What are you going to do there? And we all knew it was because they looked Latino or Latina. They looked like they might not be a person of this country, which is ridiculous, because what does a U.S. citizen look like? There's no one answer to that. There are U.S. citizens of every size, shape, color, gender, religion. I mean, it's ridiculous to put a white face as the only face of a U.S. citizen. But anyways, that's my little diatribe. But persons of color, it's the reality that I know that my stepson is unfortunately going to have to learn in order to stay alive, in order to maybe not be as intensely harassed by law enforcement. And again, that's a comment on the entire system and not individuals, although there are a lot of ignorant individuals in every profession, but unfortunately also in law enforcement. And the reality is that we as a society shouldn't have to feel like we have to work so damn hard just to be treated the way we think we should. We shouldn't. We shouldn't have to work that hard. Persons of color should not have to work so hard and handle interactions with law enforcement so differently than a white person should or does. And it's the same thing with doctors. It's the same thing with lawyers. We shouldn't have to basically demand that they provide us with the quality of care that we are entitled to. But it's a necessity. And it doesn't mean that we have to be disrespectful as patients. You know, a lot of my clients asked a lot of questions, but they were very respectful, and I never felt bothered by the fact that they were asking. Sure, you know, I had to provide the same answer over and over again, you know, either to the same individual or to every client I met. So for me, sure, was it fun explaining the process of arraignment or your rights that you waive when you sign a plea deal? No, because it was probably my 500th time doing so. But just because it was my 500th time doesn't mean that it was theirs. For some people, that is the absolutely only first time that they've had encountering the criminal justice system. So who am I to be annoyed that they're asking? They have every reason to ask. They don't know. They had no reason to know. How would you know what rights you give up when you're signing a plea deal when you've never been arrested before? So it's the same thing with the medical field. The doctors should not be insulted or annoyed by being asked questions from patients who just want medical care. They might be vulnerable. They might be in pain. They might be the mother of a child who was in a car accident. They might be an elderly person who has never had a surgery in their life and suddenly has to have a quadruple bypass. You have to recognize the humanity in each and every patient and each and every client and each and every citizen that you encounter as a person who has that title of law enforcement agent, of lawyer, of doctor. And sometimes we as human beings just tend to forget that. It's hard. It's hard to keep that part of it present in your mind when you're interacting with your clients or your patients or citizens. But we, as those who have advanced training and education, we need to do better. We need to. You deserve it. And that's something that I wish for everyone. But in the meantime, I would like everyone else out there to have the knowledge that they need to ask more questions. Now, sure, okay, I'm sure the doctors are really sick and tired of someone coming in and saying, hey, WebMD says I've got 2 weeks to live. You know, you're telling me that I'm fine, but WebMD says I have 85 different conditions. You know, I'm sure doctors are sick of WebMD. just as I'm sure that lawyers are sick of legal forums or clients who come in and tell me that they saw an episode of NCIS or Law and Order and know that that's not a crime. So, but we have so much more knowledge base out there. We have the ability to look it up. You know, before the internet, we had to rely on what doctors said unless we wanted to go to the library and do extensive research. And now we can just type in a few things and see some articles on people who also have those symptoms. I mean, even I found a support group for those with tethered cord. And, you know, in telling my father that I had tethered cord for the second time in my life, he was shocked. He was like, I thought you were incredibly rare to have it in the first place. I never even thought you could have it retether. And in the forum, in the support group that I found online, there were people who've had it 4 times in the last 15 years. There have been people who've had it, you know, they had it when they were younger and it came back again as adults. And there are people out there, and just knowing that there are other people out there who have the same condition that I have makes me feel less alone, makes me feel almost some sad comfort in knowing that other people are going through the same thing that I am. I mean, I don't wish it upon anyone, but knowing that there are others out there just makes you feel more comforted, makes you be able to say, hey guys, you know, I am 5 weeks post-op and I'm going through this. Is this something that somebody else has gone through? And just knowing that they might be able to answer your question is really comforting. So access the resources that you have out there at your disposal. Become informed. Do some research. If you're, I had no idea what arachnoiditis was. I had never heard of it before in my life. And even though I didn't end up having it, as soon as the doctor told me about it, I immediately did research and I immediately read medical articles, journals about the disorder. I looked up where the specialists are. My husband and I went to Dallas. We went to West Covina, right outside of LA. We tried to go and see the best specialists that we could find for this very rare disorder, to find more effective treatment. And if we had just gone with the first person's prognosis that I got in January of 2016, you know, I would think that my worsening symptoms were just a progression of this incurable nerve disorder and not know that the tumor that was left in there when I was 4, the part of it had grown a tail and was pulling on it because the tail had suctioned to the rest of my lumbar spine. I wouldn't know that this thing called a phylum that everyone has at the end of your spinal cord, which is basically as necessary as your appendix, but yet we still are born with it, was also pulling on it. So without going to this very last doctor, this very last neurosurgeon, I could have suffered far more dire consequences. I remember a few years ago when I had gone through a couple dozen eye surgeries. I was doing a segment for this morning program, this local morning program called The Road Show, and the news anchor came in to talk to me, or the correspondent came in to talk to me, and I was in the doctor's office, and she was asking me questions, and, you know, as a diabetic, you need to have your eyes checked at least once a year, because I had a thing called diabetic retinopathy, and it was that the blood vessels in my eyes were leaking blood into my eye, and I didn't know it because you can't see it. You can't, as part of your vision, you can't see that this is happening, but the doctor in doing his or her exam can see it. There's certain tests that they can do, and find out if there is that leakage. And if it goes untreated, you could go blind. And even if it is treated, you could still go blind, but there's far less of a chance. So I had this condition, and thankfully my mother, being a nurse, had taught me to go to my doctor's appointments to see my specialists. So I was seeing my ophthalmologist. And then over a 4-year period, I had about 24 eye laser surgeries of 600 laser points each session. I had both my eyes hemorrhaged, so I had to have the blood surgically removed in a procedure called vitrectomies. I developed cataracts, and then after having cataract surgery, scar tissue formed over the new cataract lenses, so I had to have that lasered off. So in the end, I ended up having like 36 surgeries in like a 4-year period. I had injections into my eyes. It was not fun. I was having surgery every month or so. And so I was doing this program, and I was being asked these questions, and to her credit, for more dramatic points, she waited until the camera was on and we were recording for her to ask me how I felt about the fact that I might go blind. And I remember tearing up because it was such a real possibility at that point. But the whole segment was about teaching diabetics that they needed to go get their eyes checked at least once a year. And I was a strong advocate for that. So I guess me crying on camera made it, made the point more salient. But it is true. You know, I certainly don't want to go see doctors. Having to go 56 times last year alone, I am so sick of going to doctors, no matter how good they are or how nice they are. I just am really sick of going to the appointments, you know, doctors inevitably running behind schedule, you know, waiting for hours in the waiting room, the whole shebang. I hate it, but I know I have to do it. I know if I want to have the best quality of life I can physically, you know, medically, then I have to keep it up, because I am not a well person. I'm a disabled person. But for those of you out there who are healthy, you still need to have your stuff checked out. You still need to go and have annuals. You still need to go, and if you find a lump somewhere, go to your doctor, go to a specialist. I was just reading Gabrielle Union's memoir the other day, and she was talking about a childhood friend of hers who found a lump, and I think she was going to see a specialist, but she had to reschedule, or the doctor had to reschedule, and she never followed back up. The woman ended up having stage 4 metastatic breast cancer and died within a year or two. But that woman told Gabrielle Union, her friend, to make sure that people knew to check. People knew to take care of themselves, and that includes taking care of your health. And that includes getting things checked out. You might not want to, you might be afraid. And that's what I think her friend said. You know, I was afraid, and I know that's what killed me. You know, who knows? She might have still passed away. She might have still been at stage 4. It still might have spread to her other organs by the time she got it checked out the first time. But you never know. It could have given her more months to live. It could have given her family more time with her. And so she wanted Gabrielle Union as the then ambassador for a few medical organizations, I believe, to let people know to take care of your health and to get things checked out. And we should be able to rely on doctors. And we can. But again, like I said, the systematic imperfections of the medical, legal, and criminal justice fields make it so that we, on the receiving end, have to be more vigilant. And I hope that this podcast episode has has been a service to that regard. That's what Nikki and I had planned for. That we wanted, it wasn't to bash doctors, it wasn't to accuse them of things. You know, I found the best neurosurgeon who was able to untether my cord and do it so thoroughly that a 3 to 5 hour procedure, she was in there for 7 hours. And, you know, I'm on the mending end, but I know that if anything, she at least stopped the progression of this retethering of my cord. And for that, I am so thankful. She ordered the one test that no other doctor ordered in over 2 years that showed that the remnant of my tumor had grown that tail and was sucked onto my spinal cord. And I am so grateful for her and her staff. And so this episode is not just to take pot shots at the medical field, because that would be completely unfair and a very biased, skewed view, a very jaded view of the medical system. And I'm not taking that. But Nikki and I wanted to inspire you, hopefully, with these stories, to be more vigilant, to be your own healthcare advocate, because it's what needs to happen. Again, you know your body. You're the only one, you're the best one who knows your body. You know if something doesn't feel right. You know if something else is going on. You know if something's not working, a treatment plan is not working. You know it. You feel it. Trust your instincts. Trust the fact that you know your body. And convey that to your doctor, because they're not going to know necessarily. You know, unless you tell them, they're only going off of what they're being told and what's in medical records. And until this entire system goes digital, which it's in the process of, but, you know, doctors on one end of the country, as of yet, I don't believe have access to your files from the other end of the country. So until that happens, you have to be the one that, you know, goes out and gets your past medical records. You have to be the one that tells them, well, hey, actually, I'm allergic to this, so please don't give me this medication because my throat could close up. You know, you have to help them help you, to somewhat steal and paraphrase Jerry Maguire movie. Help them help you, because you're the best person to do that. And so I want to empower each of you listening to do that, and I hope that this episode has. Now on to the next episode. Nikki is taking a little bit of a hiatus, and understandably so. She's got 2 very high-spirited, beautiful girls, and she is the best mom, the most attentive, caring mom. And so she doesn't need the stressor in her life of doing something that we both joined in as a project doing, and feeling stressed out about it. That was not the intent behind this podcast. We created this podcast to be able to make you laugh or make you think or help you feel better in some way. And so for her to have a lot of stuff going on in her life and wanting to be the best mom she can be and continue to get her personal training and health certifications, it would kind of be almost ironic that she would be doing something to help others feel good when it made her feel stressed. And so for the time being, you've got me, and I will hopefully be bringing in some pretty fun, pretty awesome guest co-hosts. If anyone out there is a fan of drag queens and has watched the Trixie and Katya show on Vice, Viceland, Bob the Drag Queen has been guest co-hosting in Katya's absence. So in that spirit, we're going to do that with Nikki's absence, her hiatus for the time being. And so listen in, stay tuned for some special guest stars. And I'm thinking that the next episode might be kind of a deeper discussion about our female selves. Nikki and I were talking about it the other day, and I've read several memoirs recently that have been incredibly inspiring to me and incredibly honest about the state of being female in America. I've read Roxane Gay's Hunger memoir, Gabrielle Union's We're Gonna Need More Wine, and Ashley Graham's memoir as well. And these women all talk about issues involving the feminine, body images, clothing, sizing in the U.S. as compared to European sizing. Gabrielle Union talks about females tearing other females down, and I think we're all taught to do that. Nikki and I were discussing how it's my opinion that women are way more judgmental against other women than men are to them. Men aren't going to notice what color your nails are or whether you got a new shirt or skirt, or what brand it is, or comment on the style of your shoe, whether it's last season or not. Most of the time, men are not doing that. But women do that, and we can be incredibly critical of one another. I mean, that even went into play when I did jury trials, and we would consider females on the jury and whether they would be critical of the complaining witness or not. Because we do tend to critique ourselves way more than men do. And so for all this discussion about female empowerment, it's not going to do that much good. And I say this with the utmost respect, but in order for us to really take care of ourselves, especially in the current state of the government that we're in, and the danger of our own rights to privacy and rights to reproductive care and rights to make our own decisions are potentially in danger. When we have that going on, we also have to consider the fact that there's a lot of damage that we put upon ourselves, with little to no influence from the men in our lives. We put it on each other, or we put it on ourselves as to what my body looks like, what size it is. Am I pretty enough? Am I, do I have a big enough ass? Do I need to get lip injections to look more like Kylie Jenner? There's a lot of talk about white women assimilating other people's cultures and appropriating other people's cultures and body images. There's so much to go on, and I think that it deserves at least its own episode about what we as females, and sorry to exclude all the males out there, but what we as females can do to love each other more and to empower each other as well as ourselves. If I'm having a fat day, what can I do to lessen the amount of self-hate that I'm feeling? And where does that come from? Where does that self-hate come from? And I was watching the Tiny Shoulders documentary on Hulu about Barbie and reinventing Barbie's image and size and color and shape. And they interviewed a lot of feminists, including Gloria Steinem and Roxane Gay. And it really posed a lot of deep questions that I think we as females, as a group, need to question ourselves and think of. Like, what's my answer to why I hate myself so much when I feel bloated? You know, what's my answer to how much hate I feel if I can't fit into a certain size in a particular store? I think it deserves a deeper discussion. And I'm not saying that others aren't doing it, but I would love to have that discussion with our next and our first guest co-host. So I hope you guys will stay tuned and listen and find out who that co-host will be once we figure it out on our end. And I hope you have all enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions or comments, either about what I've discussed on today's show or about upcoming episodes or how you think we're doing, we would always and continue to love to hear from you. We would love your feedback, whether it's publicly stated on our social media or our website, hammertimewithnikkiandkate.com. And Nikki is spelled Nikki. We would love that feedback. If you want to message us privately or email us at hammertimewithnikkiandkate@gmail.com, feel free to do so. Or contact us on Google+, Tumblr, Twitter, or Facebook, or our website. Feel free to do so. And we hope you'll stay tuned. We hope that listening to this podcast has been beneficial in some way to you, and we hope that you'll listen to the next one. We're only hoping to try and get better as a podcast and to have a better and more meaningful impact on each and every one of your lives. So with that, we'll let Big Sean take us out, and looking forward to the next episode. Love and peace to you all. Go stupid.